Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's show. Another chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that we're going to tackle tonight. And I have with me here my partner in crime, George, the other half of Überfolk, that you guys will probably know from the music that I've done. He is also the artistic master behind the Revolt series. He does all the video and audio editing for that. And I've asked him to join me tonight because he himself is he's a very well-spoken person, for one, which is always good when you have someone joining you on a stream. But he is a very, very knowledgeable about spiritual topics. He's read the Bhagavad Gita himself many times. And the chapter we're doing tonight is the yoga of meditation, which is something that I thought he would have a lot to contribute on that topic in particular. So we're going to keep our format the same. I'll read the chapter. We'll start with that. And then George and I will go through, discuss it, break it down. And then we'll take some questions from you guys. And if you have any questions specifically for George, since he's here tonight, you're more than welcome to throw them his way. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, as always, we are using this version of the Bhagavad Gita just because it's very readable. I know it's not everybody's favorite. George happens to have the same copy as I do, which makes that a little bit easier. So, the Blessed Lord said, "He who performs his duty with no concern for results is the true man of yoga, not he who refrains from action. Know that right action itself is renunciation, Arjuna. In the yoga of action, you first renounce your own selfish will. For the man who wishes to mature, the yoga of action is the path. For the man already mature, serenity is the path. When a man has become unattached to sense objects or to actions, renouncing his own selfish will, then he is mature in yoga. He should lift up the self by the self and not sink into the selfish, for the self is the only friend of the self and its only foe. The self is a friend for him who masters himself by the self, but for him who is not self-mastered, the self is the cruelest foe. When a man has mastered himself, he is perfectly at ease in cold, in heat, in pleasure or pain, in honor or in disgrace. The mature man, fulfilled in wisdom, resolute, looks with equal detachment at a lump of dirt, a rock, or a piece of pure gold. He looks impartially on all those who love him or hate him, his kinsmen, his enemies, his friends, the good and also the wicked. The man of yoga should practice concentration alone, mastering mind and body, free of possessions and desires. Sitting down, having chosen a spot that is neither too high nor too low, that is clean and covered with a grass mat, a deerskin, and a cloth, he should concentrate with his whole mind on a single object. If he practices in this way, his mind will soon become pure. With torso and head held straight, with posture steady and unmoving, gazing at the tip of his nose, not letting his eyes look elsewhere, he should sit there calm, fearless, firm in his vow to be chaste, his whole mind controlled, directed, focused, absorbed in me. Constantly mastering his mind, the man of yoga grows peaceful, attains supreme liberation, and vanishes into my bliss. He who eats too much food or too little, who is always drowsy or restless, will never succeed in the yoga of meditation. For the man who is moderate in food and pleasure, moderate in action, moderate in sleep and waking yoga, yoga destroys all sorrow. With a mind grown clear and peaceful, freed from selfish desires, absorbed in the self alone, he is called a true man of yoga. A lamp sheltered from the wind, which does not flicker, to this is compared the true man of yoga whose mind has vanished in the self. When his mind has become serene by the practice of meditation, he sees the self through the self and rests in the self, rejoicing. He knows the infinite joy that is reached by the understanding beyond the senses. Steadfast, he does not fall back from the truth. Attaining this state, he knows that there is no higher attainment. He is rooted there, unshaken even by the deepest sorrow. This is true yoga, the unbinding of the bonds of sorrow. Practice this yoga with determination and with a courageous heart. Abandoning all desires born of his own selfish will, a man should learn to restrain his unruly senses with his mind. Gradually he becomes calm and controls his understanding. Focusing on the self, he should think of nothing at all. However, often the restless mind may break loose and wander, he should rein it in and constantly bring it back to the self. When his mind becomes clear and peaceful, he enters absolute joy. His passions are calmed forever. He is utterly absorbed in God. Mastering mind and body, purified from all sin, he easily gains true freedom and finds an infinite joy. Mature in yoga, impartial everywhere that he looks, he sees himself in all beings and all beings in himself. The man who sees me in everything and everything within me will not be lost to me, nor will I ever be lost to him. He who is rooted in oneness realizes that I am in every being. Wherever he goes, he remains in me. When he sees all beings as equal in suffering or in joy because they are like himself, that man has grown perfect in yoga. Arjuna said, "You have taught that the essence of yoga is equanimity, Krishna. But since the mind is so restless, how can that be achieved? The mind is restless, unsteady, turbulent, wild, stubborn. Truly, it seems to me as hard to master as the wind." The blessed Lord said, "You are right, Arjuna. The mind is restless and hard to master, but by constant practice and detachment, it can be mastered in the end. Yoga is indeed hard for those who lack self-restraint, but if you keep striving earnestly in the right way, you can reach it." Arjuna said, "Krishna, what happens to the man who with faith but no self-control wanders from the path of yoga before he becomes mature? Hasn't he lost both the here and the hereafter? Doesn't he, rootless and insubstantial, fade like a cloud in the sky? This is the doubt that troubles me, Krishna. I beg you, please help me, for only you can remove this doubt from my mind." The blessed Lord said, "Neither here nor hereafter, Arjuna, is that man lost. No one who does good work will come to an evil end. Reaching the heaven of the righteous after uncountable years, that man will be born again to parents who are upright and wealthy. He may even be born to parents who have practiced yoga and are wise, though a birth as fortunate as this is more difficult to obtain. There he regains the knowledge acquired in his former life, and from that point on, Arjuna, he strives towards the ultimate goal. Unconsciously, he returns to his former practice. Even a man who asks about yoga goes beyond formal religion. Striving with constant effort, cleansing himself of all sin, through many lifetimes, at last he attains the ultimate goal. The man of yoga is greater than ascetics or the learned, or those who perform the rituals. Therefore, be a man of yoga, my son. Practice yoga sincerely with single-minded devotion. Love me with perfect faith. Bring your whole self to me. So there's our chapter there. George, do you have anything that you'd like to throw in there before I kind of go back through the chapter again? You're muted, by the way.
I think you muted me.
I did mute you, so there wouldn't be any background noise coming through.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on, Kat. So yeah, just to answer your question, excellent reading. It was good to read that chapter again. Many ideas come to my mind as you were passing over some of these verses. But why don't you start with some of the observations you have, and then we can go from there.
All right. So the very first thing, when like right at the start, Krishna is saying, "He who performs his duty with no concern for results is the true man of yoga, not he who refrains from action. Know that right action itself is renunciation." So this is something that has come up a few times in the Q&As, in previous streams or in chats and elsewhere. There's been a lot of misunderstanding and confusion about acting without attachment to results. And we've been covering this topic a lot so far in this book. Krishna keeps coming back to this because it's really important. And if you can get a handle on what's meant here, you'll definitely be in a better position to understand Evola's argument in regards to the hierarchy of warriors and priests that we're going to be covering in the next Revolt episode. This is really key to that. And so Krishna is saying that true renunciation is not avoiding one's duties, but doing those duties without attachment, surrendering to God's will. When you're attached to a certain outcome, or you need the prospect of some material reward to motivate you, then you're pursuing your own will and not God's. So when you can surrender the fruits of your actions, then you can be a tool for God's will, whatever that may be. And you can't really unite with God when you're attached to these material desires, which doesn't mean that you act with apathy or that you don't feel the urgency of certain situations. I do think a lot of people tend to look at the state of the world or even the state of their own lives and feel like they have to do something, that they have to act in order to get a better material outcome. But outcomes are better left in God's hands. You do what you're supposed to do and you leave the rest to God. So, George, you've listened to me talk about this in previous streams, I think.
Mhm.
How would you explain it differently than I have for those who are struggling to understand how one could act without attachment and still have the motivation to act?
Well, the key thing here is really recognizing the difference between the lower self and the goal, which is the higher self. So, what will constantly happen during one's meditation or even spiritual practice? But meditation is a perfect microcosm of the whole spiritual journey. So, what has happened to me many times in meditation is I start reaching a new height, a new plateau of meditation. I'll have a few brief moments where I can see that kind of Zen peace. I'm not fully there yet, but I can get enough of a glimpse of it to perceive that I am witnessing it, and that this must be the place that the great sages speak of. What always ends up taking me out of that state is the little me, the little self, the ego George, observing what I'm experiencing and then saying to myself, starting to chime in with analysis, with trying to take ownership of the experience for the ego. And what that does is immediately pulls me out of the experience, where my memory of my little self wanted to claim the experience and stole it away from this higher self. So the idea of renunciation in your action is to prevent that process from happening, because it will happen in many different ways along your spiritual journey. You will start to feel like you've made some progress. You're starting to feel different. You're starting to notice that people react to you differently. You're starting to feel more confident. And some people will start to develop like a messiah complex when they get into that place. And so this is another example of where keeping the ego in check and renouncing the fruits or the outcome of the journey, you renounce it, you act instead for the pure love of the journey. Another example of this I could give, because we don't have in the modern world many close experience with people who are striving heroically. But kind of an example of that would be like a sporting event. So like a championship sporting event where you have the very best athletes that have trained their entire lives and they're going for the prize. They want to win the grail. Let's say it's the Stanley Cup. So the team that is new that's never been to the playoffs before might actually have a better lineup with more talent, but maybe they're younger and less experienced. They might be going up against a veteran squad that's been there many times before, actually a step slower and don't have the same overall talent. But because they keep the equanimity of their minds, they're able to hit those goals. They're able to make all the plays they need to actually bring about victory. And so what you'll always hear the championship team when they talk about the philosophy in the locker room, it's always about never being satisfied with anything they've already attained. So they're not the ones celebrating with champagne after they've won the quarterfinals. It's always the new team that hasn't been there before that's doing that, because they're letting off all this energy that they've built up. They didn't know they were going to get this far. They're surprised by their own success. You'll never see a championship team doing that. They'll have a very sedated celebration when they win the quarters because their mind is on the prize. So where this relates to spiritually is that when you're looking at your ultimate goal of attaining knowledge of the super self, you don't want anything in the way between here and there that the little self is going to seize upon and is going to ruin the experience for you, or is going to freeze your development at this lesser stage of the journey. You want to go all the way to the top. And that's what the teaching of Krishna to Arjuna is here, to renounce so that your action is pure action, not attached to the outcome. And it is in that state that you're going to be able to push through all of the ego clingings that the little self will do, and that will help you achieve the goal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of a nice segue into this next section. Even, Krishna goes on to say, I have to first clarify to people that, there's a lot of this self and self and self kind of talk within this chapter. And some of these selves are lowercase and some are uppercase. And it's really hard to distinguish between those two things when you're reading it aloud. So, for example, when Krishna says he should lift up the self by the self, he should lift up the lowercase self by the uppercase self, and not sink into the selfish. For the lowercase self is the only friend of the uppercase self and its only foe. So he's distinguishing here between exactly what you were saying, like this higher self and this little self. And I mean, basically, like, we're responsible for our own spiritual elevation. This is kind of what Krishna is saying here when he says you need to lift up the self, the lowercase self, by the uppercase self. We're responsible for that. No one else can do it for us. You might encounter teachers or people who help or support you on your journey, but ultimately you have to be the one that walks that path. And so what Krishna is getting at here is that our biggest enemy is our own mind. And when things go wrong, in our lives, we tend to blame other people or external circumstances or whatever, when really the biggest problem is that our mind was attached to a specific outcome and then is now reacting against not getting what it wanted. It's that kicking against the circumstances that causes the most suffering. So he's saying that this uncontrolled mind has a lot of potential for causing harm and degrading your level of consciousness, whereas the controlled mind can be a very powerful tool at your disposal. So, in order to be able to use the mind as a friend, you have to understand a little bit about the mind's nature. So, in Vedic philosophy, there's there's kind of like 4 levels of mind. So there's mana, or just mind, which is the thing that creates the thoughts, the buddhi or intellect that analyzes and decides. If it's getting attached to an object or a person, that's chitta. And then the ego, or the ahankar, that identifies with like all the bodily identifications, where you're like seeking pride in things like wealth or status or beauty or your intelligence, or whatever you're latching onto that's a source of pride. So they're not really 4 different things, but they're 4 different levels of functioning. Even though Krishna speaks repeatedly of the mind and intellect as 2 things, and he emphasizes that we do need to surrender both of them to God. He's saying use that higher mind to elevate the lower mind. Use intellect to control the mind. He's already explained how to do this in previous chapters, so I won't go over it again here. You guys can watch the previous streams if you need a refresher on that. But just know that, the biggest enemies in your life actually reside in your own mind. Anger, envy, lust, like all the 7 deadly sins, really, illusion. The internal enemies in your own mind are far more pernicious to anything that's external to you. An external enemy can injure you, but it's the internal ones that can make you live in this state of constant misery, always being tormented by things that are, so common in modern people: depression, anxiety, stress, all of that. And Vedic philosophy puts a lot of emphasis on the consequences of thoughts, even to the point of considering that they play a role in physical illness. The power of your thoughts to damage you is really immense. And so many people don't even realize they're poisoning themselves with their own low vibe, out of control thoughts. And then they continue to blame their misery on, other people or things. And, it's not that external things can't hurt you, but they can't hurt you nearly as much as you hurt yourself with an uncontrolled mind. Most people are very, imprisoned by their thoughts. George, you've probably got something to say on this, because you've done a number of 10-day Vipassana courses, and I know Vipassana teaches a lot about, the so-called monkey mind, and you've probably got some observations yourself that you could even share with us.
Right. I mean, we can observe that once we try to actually control the mind, we realize that it's really completely out of control. We're not normally observing the mind in a way that allows us to see what's actually happening, both on the conscious and subconscious levels. So the conscious mind will, for instance, leave your house, see your mailbox, think about whether or not a letter may have come from that friend in Hungary, then thinking about your time when you were in Hungary several years ago, and thinking about that restaurant you ate at, and then wondering what you're going to have for lunch that day. And this is where the mind is normally, this is the normal function of the mind for most people. And for most of us during all of our waking life, from the moment we first wake up, the mind is jumping like a drunken monkey from branch to branch, like it doesn't know where it wants to sit. And all one has to do is start trying to meditate, and you will see this. It is the most remarkable thing that is actually quite shocking. You don't, we live our lives so asleep most of the time, so unconscious, that we don't actually realize what's happening in our minds. We're basically just passively living through life. And that's why it's referred to as the doctrine of awakening. The Buddha's book that Julius Evola wrote about the Buddha. The idea of awakening is that, prior to experiencing meditation and doing self-examination, one is basically moving passively through life, doesn't know what subject it's staying on from moment to moment. And so the power of the mind is been compared to by the Buddha as sort of like a giant elephant that has a tremendous amount of strength, and with a proper mahout to ride that elephant and to steer it where it wants it to go, it can be used to move mountains a piece at a time. Without that, if that elephant is a rampaging elephant, it can destroy your whole village. It can kill you. And the mind is like this. The mind is like an untamed elephant or an untamed dog. Your mind is like, I've often spoken about the mind this way, how, meditation first showed me this glimpse of how my mind was more like a dog mind. And that now that I was aware of this as the observer, I could no longer allow that state of affairs to continue. I had to take this dog and train it. And so what that involves is all aspects of self-discipline. It involves you, not just passively living through your life and doing things according to what your impulses tell you to do, what your sensory desires tell you to do, but instead if you know that particular action is not healthy, you would immediately reject it, because you're taken all out of that whole current of craving and aversion. You're instead acting in accordance with the higher mind. So what Krishna is speaking about here, or rather Arjuna, when he poses the question, is like the mind is so out of control. How can anybody hope to bring it under their control? And that's what the technique of meditation is all about. It's about actually, going very deeply into beyond just the conscious level of the mind, and learning how to find the place of stillness.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Krishna goes on to say next is, he starts talking about the one who's attained a state of yogic perfection, and then talks about the preparation that's required for that. And he does say you need to spend a dedicated time alone every day for meditation, which isn't to say that it has to be a long time. I mean, it could just be 15 minutes, or maybe it's an hour or more, depends like what you've got time for, where you are in your journey. But you want to be doing some kind of spiritual practice every day where you're shutting out the rest of the world. This helps to elevate your consciousness, and then you can kind of gradually increase your baseline consciousness as you go about the rest of your daily activities. You gradually make progress with this. And he talks about the ideal way to sit in meditation, how to prepare for it. One of the things he mentions is a straight posture and having the eyes only half closed, because you don't want to fall asleep in meditation. I know, George, you've got probably some stories about that from your meditation retreats of people falling asleep and
Yeah, actually, there was a funny meditation retreat I went to one time, and you got to sit at the end of each day and ask the teacher some questions. And one of the students said, "What is the meditation technique that the people in the front row are doing?" And the front row is where the most longtime students are sitting. And they said, "What do you mean the special meditation technique?" And they said, "Well, we notice them always rocking forward and back, forward and back. And we're wondering, is that some, kind of more advanced technique that you're not teaching us yet?" And he said, "Oh, no, no, that's just them falling asleep." And, and, I actually ended up learning also that monks, many monks in Tibet and in Japan and other places, they drink a lot of green tea to prevent themselves from falling asleep, because the mind is just so used to being completely in charge of the consciousness that if you try to keep the mind empty and just observe, you start falling asleep right away, because it's just not a normal state to be in, to be both empty but awake.
Yeah, and I know, after I released that guided meditation, that Zurius did the music for, and people did that and said, it put them right to sleep. So it's, I mean, and isn't it true though? The times when you sleep the worst are the times when you just can't shut your mind off, and it's just cycling through these thoughts, and you just can't
Yep.
quiet the mind enough to actually start to fall asleep.
Yep.
Um,
And if people are really in crisis, it's kind of like an elephant trampling through your village, right? Like,
yeah.
the mind can just be your worst foe. It can be your worst enemy. And like you were saying, most of us actually do the worst things to ourselves, not any external foe. And that's why that inner battle is the most important one to win.
It really is. And Krishna also goes on to talk about moderation in food, pleasure, action, waking, don't eat too much, don't indulge too much, don't sleep too much. He mentions being firm in a vow of chastity, celibacy. Um but the basic message there is that sensory stimulation creates material attachment and gets in the way of good spiritual practice. You need moderation. Don't deprive the body of what it needs to be healthy and to thrive, but also don't be indulging beyond what's necessary either. Extreme asceticism is going to be just as much of a hindrance as extreme hedonism. And there's a story about the Buddha, that it's said that before gaining enlightenment, the Buddha had given up eating and drinking and was just sitting in meditation. But after a few days of just like this extreme fasting and practicing like that, the lack of food and water was making him just weak and dizzy, and he found it impossible to keep his mind steady in meditation. And at that time, some village women happened to be passing by, just carrying their water from the river. And I think they were talking about, don't tighten the strings of this. Was it a tempura or something? Some stringed instrument. Don't tighten the strings so much that they break. And the Buddha heard this, and he says to himself, "Oh, these illiterate village women are speaking such words of wisdom. There's this message here for us too. We too should tighten our bodies, practice some austerities, but not to the extent that the body's destroyed. Just like you're tightening the strings on, your guitar or whatever, they need to be tightened enough to be in tune. But if you do it too much, you're just going to snap the string, and then it hits you in the face and takes your eye out." So
Right, right. It's a similar concept that the Tao Te Ching teaches. The Tao of everything, the Tao of eating, the Tao of every aspect of life, of sleeping, of, you can indulge in just pleasures, but you have to know when enough is enough. When you've already extracted the benefit or the enjoyment from something, and it's time to put it down. You have to have that type of self-discipline. And it's almost unfortunate when we have to totally not have something that we enjoy just because we've never been able to demonstrate that self-control.
can you do you maybe want to explain to people, how do you know if something is a just pleasure?
Well, I mean, it would be that, upon your self-observation, there was no blowback from it, or that the net benefit is far greater than any negative. So, just an example would be, if you are looking to eat some French fries or some potato chips, and that they taste really good, but this particular place doesn't make the best fries. So, maybe it's not worth it because I'm not going to feel so good tomorrow if I eat them. And if I'm not really going to enjoy them, then, well, that's probably not an equation that's worth gambling. And so, a just pleasure is a pleasure where you can, where you basically know, like, I've never eaten a salad that I regretted. There's certain things that, your inner compass is pointing north, and then tells you, inside what's right and wrong. That's the great thing about this whole path as well, is it doesn't get focused on moralizing. It just gets focused on teaching you the tools, and you're going to find it in your own conscience. So eventually you're going to know what's right and wrong based on your self-observation, based on how it makes you feel, and based on how whether it brings anybody else to harm.
Yeah, and I think also there's an element of, do you crave to have more of it? Like for me, my policy has always been that, like, typically when I make cookies, I will never actually bake more than what I'm allowing myself to eat at one sitting, because if I bake them all, I'll eat them all. And it's like, well, that's not really a just pleasure, because to me, like, I have the biggest sweet tooth. I'm more into the sweet snacks than the salty snacks most of the time. And so it's just kind of like cookies are like chips to me. You can't have just one. And so if I make all of them, I'll tell myself I'm only going to have like a couple of them, and then I end up having like 10, and that's my dinner or something like that. And
Right.
like, because the craving for it is there, right? So it's like, oh, that was good. I think I'll have another one. And at that point, it's no longer a just pleasure. That's indulgence that, I think Krishna would frown upon. But
Well, maybe he'd say that you need to eat as many cookies as possible, so you don't need to come back here again for another life, because
right,
you won't have satisfied your cookie craving, right?
that's
But
also a consideration as
but you
well.
can't ever get rid of it, can you? No matter how many cookies you eat, it just resparks
It just
itself.
not to toot my own horn, but I make really good cookies. Like, it's just but,
I've tried
how
your cookies, it's true.
how does a person put this kind of moderation, this middle path into practice in the modern world? How does someone overcome all of these endless temptations of the senses when they're first starting out on this path? And what sort of pitfalls could a person expect if they want to try to start living a more moderate lifestyle?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's the self-observation that's so important. That's what meditation is. I hate to sound like a one-trick pony here, but it all flows from there, because meditation is training the mind. And you would never accuse somebody who's going to the gym and learning how to get stronger or strengthen their bodies, or learning how to do combat martial arts. You'd never say to them, "Why are you wasting all your time lifting barbells, or fighting somebody that's not even mad at you? Why don't you just enjoy your life, play video games, and sit around and eat potato chips?" Well, I mean, the answer is the person's training themselves. They're training their body to become something um, more beautiful, more powerful, something they can rely on, and that others he can protect others. And so it's the same thing with meditation in the mind. Everything is going to flow from your self-awareness. And so when you spend the time meditating and detaching yourself from all of your thoughts, and silencing the mind, and learning how to bring the mind under your control so that it goes only where you want it to go, well, then you've suddenly broken the cravings that would previously have just pulled you in whatever direction they wanted you to go. You suddenly start to, by observing yourself, so you're still going to make mistakes, you're still going to fall, you're still going to fail, you're still going to sin, but in your contemplation time every morning and every evening, you're going to reflect. During a part of that time, you will reflect upon your day, you'll reflect upon the things you said to people. And I think that you're probably similar to me in this way, Kat, in that I remember times in my life when I've been mean to people, and I can't stop thinking about it even though decades have passed. Sometimes it's people that I may have been mean to in the schoolyard, something I said that I now regret having said. I still feel it as part of my karma. And so, becoming more in control of the mind is the absolute key thing, because your entire life flows from your mind. Your mind is how you interface with and experience the senses and everything in this world. And it's also going to be your ability to turn it into your greatest friend and to turn it into a great asset. It's going to determine whether or not you're going to find your spiritual heights. So what was the second part of that question again? What pitfalls? You're muted, I think.
I am too. Sorry, Oslo was walking across my desk and I was making a little bit of noise. Yeah, what pitfalls would somebody maybe reasonably expect when they're sort of like starting out, like trying to become more moderate in their lifestyle? Like, maybe it's the first time that they've really tried to exercise some self-discipline and stuff. So what should they be watching out for? How can they maybe mitigate some of those?
Well, first of all, you have to expect to fail. You're going to fail time and time and time again. And you have to be willing to accept that, and don't emotionally overreact to it. And this is the inverse side of renouncing the fruits, because you're also going to renounce the negative fruits as well, right? So that makes you more resilient to the battle. And it's interesting to note some of the different terms that were used to describe the Buddha are all terms like a warrior. So you see here some of the terms: a struggling ascetic with fighting breast, an advance with a fighter's steps, hero, victor of the battle, supreme triumph of the battle, favorable conditions for the combat, qualifies as a warrior becoming to a king, well worthy of a king, the attributes of a king. And in such maxims as to die in battle is better than to live defeated. So the concept here is that, you have all these bonds that are holding you back, and you're going to have to have the greatest battle of your life to overcome your lower self. And those are the pitfalls you're going to face. You're constantly going to face challenges, and you're constantly going to have to face defeat. But what you have to do is know that as long as you never quit, as long as you get up every time, you dust yourself off and you go back at the goal again, you know that eventually the fruits will come to you, that only if you give up will it stop coming to you. So in addition to not being able to handle the defeat, one of the other pitfalls people have is they expect results to come too soon. And when they've started to experience results, they expect to always be able to replicate them. One of the most humbling experiences that I had in meditation was when I went to my first meditation retreat. It was a 10-day vow of silence, meditated 14 hours a day. By the end of it, I was just floating out of the place. I went back 2 years later to do another one, thought I was going to continue right from that point where I left off. But my life was going through, my outside life was going through some turbulence at that time. And as a result, what happened was I went to that second retreat expecting to carry on from where I was at the end of the first one. And instead, I had a terrible retreat. I was constantly frustrated. I couldn't get back in that zone again. I had the memory of all these places that I wanted to go in my meditation, but I was just troubled too much by my mind. It was too wild. It didn't want to calm down. Even when I slept, I had terrible dreams that whole 10-day retreat. And I kind of just like suffered through it like a stoic rather than the way I'd experienced my first retreat. I went on to have great experiences again with meditation, but it was just that I had to learn a lesson there. And what was happening was, because I had already achieved a certain degree of success with it and I'd felt accomplished at it, I approached it without the same humility. Again, this is another thing that renunciation helps you with. Because I was identifying myself with the success I'd already had. I was expecting it to continue from there, and I wasn't approaching it with the same honest mentality. And that meant that I just thought it was going to come easy, and I didn't realize that this work is never ending, and I didn't approach it with the right mental attitude. And as a result, it knocked me backwards. And it took me actually a little while to start meditating again after that experience. It actually set me off the course for quite a number of months. So, those are the type of pitfalls you're going to experience. It's very difficult. You're going to have to accept failure. and don't get attached to the fruits of the outcome. Just be detached from it and don't expect it to come easy and expect to fail as the whole process goes on. But as long as you never quit, you will eventually you will reach the goal.
Thank you. I think that's really good advice. And, you know, I think you're, because you've done a number of these 10-day courses, and it's something I often suggest to people if they want to learn how to meditate is to try one of those courses. Um, just to take a slight digression here, do you have, since you've had good experiences, you've had bad experiences, do you have any advice for somebody who's interested in doing their first 10-day retreat in terms of what they could expect, or how to approach it if they start having a bad experience there, they're not enjoying it?
Okay, so I should say that out of the few retreats that I've done, there's probably been about maybe 250, 300 Vipassana meditators that I've met and spoken to them sometimes before, but almost always after the course ends. On the 10th day, you do a lot of socializing, you get to talk finally. And so you're sharing your experience with people. So there's a lot of that goes on. 95% of people have amazing experiences with it. So as long as you go in with just an open mind and you don't go in with a critical mind, but you're just going to surrender yourself to the process and just try the technique, you're going to do well. Most people do. That where most people can eventually reach is different for everybody. Not everybody's going to reach awakening, and very few people, in human history have ever reached that point. But that doesn't mean it's not going to make your life better in tangible ways in the short term. So what you have when you go to one of these 10 days, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. At 4:30, you're supposed to be in the meditation hall. You meditate for a few hours, break for breakfast, meditate for another couple hours, break for lunch, have a couple hours off in the afternoon, and then back to meditation. There's no dinner served. You're allowed a piece of fruit and a tea at dinner time, and that's it. But because you're sitting around a lot, you really don't burn a lot of calories, so you don't really feel hungry anyway. You're going to have a lot of time in contemplations. You can't speak to another person. At the same time, you're going to have the best peace you ever had. You hand your phone, you turn your cell phone off, and you hand it over when you come in, and you just turn off. You don't read anything. You don't write anything. You don't make any phone calls. You don't have any communication with anyone. It's just you alone. As the famous French mathematician Pascal said, is man's greatest fear is to sit in a room alone. And that's why it's described as a battle. It's a form of combat.
They actually did a study on people. Don't ask me like who did it or what it was all about, why they did this, but they would put people in a room alone for 15 minutes with nothing to do but give themselves electric shocks. And the vast majority of people chose to shock themselves rather than just sit in silence for a whole 15 minutes. Can you believe it?
Yes, and well, actually, that fits completely in with the teaching of the Dhamma, because people are so conditioned to experiencing the world through their senses that, given the choice of zero sensory stimuli or electroshock, they chose the pain of electroshock just to feel something, because they can't separate their own mind's consciousness from the condition of the senses. They're experiencing the world just through the senses, and that's why you have to break out of that and move on to the point where you're reaching the Param Atman, the super self.
The capital S self, which that's a kind of a nice segue into the next section I marked out. I think it's on page 92 of this edition that we're using, where Krishna says, when his mind has become serene by the practice of meditation, he sees the higher self through the lower self and rests in the higher self, rejoicing. And it's like when the mind is purified, you can start to perceive yourself as being separate from the mind and the body and the intellect and all of these sense perceptors. Like a great analogy I once came across was to liken the unclean mind to a glass of murky water where, you can't see through it, but if you just wait for it to settle, then the water becomes clearer. And so like the unclean or uncontrolled mind likewise obscures perception of the soul and of that higher self. And in such a case, any spiritual knowledge one has is only going to be at the theoretical level, not at the experiential level, because they haven't actually separated out that observer part. You know, can you speak to the whole, you know, being the observer?
Right. So, I mean, in the West, we really over identify with the mind. We really think of ourselves as our mind. In the East, the teaching is more that the mind is just another one of the senses. And the way that it arrives at that conclusion is the fact that you can have an empty mind and still be awake and conscious, and that's the observer. The observer is the part of you that is super self, and it knows everything. It knows all truth. Has a pure conscience. It is aware of right and wrong. And it is during the time of your deepest meditation, you are basically convening with this energy, this super self. The only way you can achieve it, though, is being completely pure. And that takes a long time for us. But the idea of the observer is that you are not your mind. Most people in the West look at themselves, at every thought that they have, they attach themselves onto that thought. So they have this thought that passes through them, and they think, well, I wouldn't have thought it if it weren't important. So no, I have to pursue this, even if it makes no sense, even if it doesn't hold up to scrutiny and it doesn't serve any of your higher goals. But because you had this thought, you're going to blurt something out that you don't really mean upon further reflection, or you're going to act in some way that's self-destructive or harmful to others, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, blurting things out without thinking is it's my talent.
That's what caused you problems on Twitter.
It's probably for my own good that God arranged for me to be banned from Twitter. Oh, how embarrassing for me. So on the next page, he says, however, the restless mind may break loose and wander, he should rein it in and constantly bring it back to self. So, you know, meditation is kind of this practice of just failing over and over. You're supposed to be focused on the breath or on God or whatever you're meditating on, right? Like the Bhagavad Gita says you should only meditate on God, but I know people start out sometimes meditating on other things while they're learning, and that's fine. You know, so you like, let's say you're doing the breath meditation like they teach you in Vipassana, and so, you know, your mind wanders, just come back to the breath. Oh, I failed again. Now I have to come back to the breath again. Oh, I failed again. I spent the entire hour I've been sitting here failing and only remembering to focus on my breath like 3 whole breaths out of the entire hour.
Yeah.
Like that,
Sometimes you're
right?
like a half hour off into some journey of thought, and before you realize that, what am I doing? I'm
You
supposed to
spend
be
your
meditating.
entire meditation time with your
Yeah.
mind wandering. So, you know, like,
Yeah.
what advice would you have for somebody who is frustrated with how often their mind wanders and feels like that because of that, they're just not making any progress as a result?
Well, it's not binary. You're not just going to end up with a monkey mind and then suddenly a purely awakened mind. You're going to extract the fruits of this practice right from your first sitting that you do. With every hour that you spend on the mat meditating, you are benefiting a little bit from it. Your mind is becoming more calm. So, you know, yeah, it's true. Your mind still jumps all over the place, but now it's taking 5 or 10 seconds to do that, when it used to do it 3 times a second or whatever. And so what happens as we move through this graduated state, you know, a very, very gradual process of self-examination, we start to gradually add virtue onto ourselves and shave off little bits of vice. So as we keep progressing, we don't change overnight, but over a long period of time, the shift is very profound. And so don't expect quick results. Yes, that's what's going to happen. Your mind's going to keep wandering, but then you'll have experiences where, you know, you have never had it happen before, and you've meditated 30 times, and then all of a sudden you have 5 minutes where your mind is just empty and clear, and you experience the most pristine, beautiful peace that you could ever have. And, it doesn't matter what state you're in life and where you are, whatever suffering you're going through or whatever life has dealt you, if you have the ability to create that 5 minutes of peace for yourself, that's something worth attaining. And then that's just the beginning of where it can go.
Well, and I think once you experience that, even just in that tiny sliver, you realize that in fact, you do have the ability to control this and you can get to that place. You've done it once, you can do it again, and you could do it for a longer period. And it is that gradual building up of it, and it takes practice. But I think once people experience it for the first time, you at least it's not just something you're kind of undertaking on blind faith anymore, that you'll get there. You're like, oh, I had this like transcendental experience for 10 seconds, but it was real and I did it. And, so it's not like you have to spend the entire time you're sitting in meditation floating on a cloud.
Well, look, there's more than 1 billion people in the world that meditate regularly. So they're not doing that because they're just lazy and they want to navel gaze. There are fruits from this that are very profound that you will start to receive in tiny incremental doses. And as long as you stay on the path, you will continue to make progress, and you are only competing against yourself, nobody else.
Yeah.
And
And
so that's why you're perfectly matched as an opponent.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to tell if you're making progress, probably the easiest benchmark is, do you feel like you're becoming a happier person? And not happiness in the sense of like you're gratifying your senses, but happy in a more sattvic way, and that you're kind of reaching this divine bliss, this equanimity. You have a greater capacity for compassion, or an interest in gaining spiritual knowledge. I feel like that's one of the first things you start to notice, is that you're just kind of you become a more joyful person, even if it's just in a subtle way. And I think oftentimes other people in your life will notice it about you before you do.
Absolutely. Yes, you start getting in touch with the super self, the Param Atma.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that you start to actually taking on the virtues and qualities of the super self, and that starts becoming your personality. God's personality starts acting through you. And this is why when someone starts talking like this, that it's so important to have the equanimity and lack of ego. Because what happens to a lot of people on this path, as I've said earlier, is that they become trapped by the success that they have. So it's very important never to develop a messianic complex. It's very difficult what you're trying to achieve, and you're your only opponent, and it's not to impress anybody else, and it's for no other reward than the supreme goal. That will keep you on track.
Yes. And on page 94, where Krishna says, "The man who sees me in everything and everything within me will not be lost to me, nor will I ever be lost to him." It's this idea of, keeping your mind fixed in that connection with God, which the practice of, that daily sadhana makes easier. And, the easiest way to unite the mind with God, of course, is to see everything in connection with God. So, to give an example, let's say somebody hurts you, and the nature of the mind is going to be that it wants to develop feelings of resentment or anger or even hatred or contempt for that person. And if you allow that to happen, you move away from that union with God. Whereas, instead you could choose to see God seated within that person and say to yourself, oh, well, God is using this person to test me, to help me increase my virtue of tolerance or patience or love, etc. And so that's why he's inspired this person to behave like this towards me. But I'm going to choose not to allow the incident to disturb me inwardly. Likewise, if you find your mind constantly turning on incidents in the past that upset you or traumatized you, you're separating yourself from God, when you could shift your paradigm and understand that God gives you trials and tribulations in order to help you practice detachment from the material world. I think, one of the biggest things that people allow to hinder them spiritually is this kind of mentality. Like, there's often this belief that if God loved you or was real or whatever, that he would grant you an easy, happy life. And people often pray to God like he's Santa Claus. Like, they hope that he's going to bring them gifts of material comforts and joy, but they rarely just want to accept their circumstances and pray just for the virtue needed to face difficulties, or even to say thank you for the challenge. Probably one of the best things I did for myself spiritually was shifting away from praying towards asking for anything unless I'm asking on behalf of somebody else. But just like, and even if I'm praying for somebody else's benefit, I'm not praying and saying like, oh, please God, give this person what they want. It's more like, please inspire them to have the virtues that they need to get through this and to learn what they need to learn from it. And that's the only thing I would ask for myself as well. And also to even just say like, well, thanks for giving me this test, this chance to prove myself and to grow, and to even just like shift that in my own mind has been extremely beneficial. Do you do anything similar? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that come to mind is the hermetic idea of the human being as the seed, which has to die and break open in order to become the sprout, which becomes the plant, which becomes the tree, which then fruits on its own, and so forth. And this is kind of the process that we have to go through. And that means that life isn't going to be easy. We're pushing up through rocks and sometimes hard ground. Sometimes it rains too much and is going to flood us. Life is full of all kinds of unknown twists and turns that are going to come your way. And even if you're blessed with a perfect life, you're going to have people you love that aren't. And so suffering is always going to brush up against you or be experienced personally. And, that it is tough to reach the goal. There's no way to candy coat this. But the reason that God doesn't just make the whole process easy is because the souls that really hunger for God will find God. It's just that one has to hunger for God the way a starving man does, or the way has to thirst for the knowledge of God the way a man in the desert thirsts for water. And those people that are willing to go through the difficult growth, they go to God, and that's who God wants to be surrounded with, those who choose him. Think about the kind of an analogy in your own approach to people. If somebody doesn't want to be around your company, do you seek out their company? It doesn't mean you hate them or you want to have bad things happen to them. It just means you let those that want to come to you, come to you. Yeah. And God is the same way. He wants the children, his children that want to come to him, to be the ones that he is surrounded by.
Well, I gotta say, when it comes to cats, the ones that don't want to come to me are the ones I want to pet the most. For anyone who doesn't know, George is a cat person too. He has far more cats than I do. So I'm sure you're a little bit more patient with trying to get them to come to you, though. You've got a way with animals that I don't have.
I've got my cats duct taped to the wall right now.
Yeah. I should have done that with mine, but so far he's only walked past here once and then went back to sleep. So kind of as we get toward the end of this chapter, then, Arjuna himself has some reservations about all this, and he seems to think that this is too difficult to be practical advice. And, one of the things that's missing from this translation that I wish was in here, and this kind of shows the importance of sometimes like looking at multiple translations of things, because while this one's a very readable translation, especially like for Westerners, some of the nuances left out of it. And in the original Sanskrit, Krishna's response addresses Arjuna as the mighty armed son of Kunti, which doesn't come across in this translation, but there's like this implication that if Arjuna can defeat the best warriors in battle, shouldn't he also be able to defeat the power of his own mind? but I mean, he's not being mean about it. He's just, and he's not denying Arjuna's objection. He does agree that it's hard to do, but just because something's difficult doesn't mean that we don't push ahead, because I mean, where would we even be as a civilization if no one was ever willing to risk facing challenges and difficulty? Krishna just says it takes constant practice. And that's why he's saying daily practice is so important. It's just like if you wanted to learn a musical instrument, you need to practice every day if you want to get good at it, which is why I don't play a musical instrument well, because every time I've tried, I've not been disciplined enough to want to set aside the time to do even just 15 minutes of playing scales, because it's just too boring. And so I just wouldn't do it. It's a failure of my parents for not cracking down on me and making me practice. But, meditation is the same way. This path that Krishna is talking about is exactly the same. That's why it doesn't matter if you only do 15 minutes a day or even 5 minutes a day, if that's all you have, just build up the habit of doing it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I think I remember you even telling me once that everybody leaves a Vipassana course thinking that they're just going to go home and meditate every day. And then what happens is their daily life gets in the way and they don't do it anymore. And so the most important thing to have going into a Vipassana course was to have already a daily practice, that you already do this, even if you're not doing it right or doing it to your standard. I mean, for anyone who isn't aware, I was scheduled to take a Vipassana course, and then COVID happened, and I really wasn't able to do it after that. So, unfortunately, I've missed out. But we've got somebody in the chat who says he's done over 15 of these. So I think
Wow.
he's taken my fair share of courses, and I appreciate him doing that on my behalf.
Has he done any 20 days yet?
If you're still in the chat, can you let us know if you've done any 20-day courses yet? Be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, so you have to have sat 5-10 days in order to be allowed to apply for a 20-day, and there's a few other regulations too. I think I'm not getting that wrong. I think that's how it works.
They also offer 30 days as well?
And 60 days, and I
Wow.
think very rarely 90-day long ones too. So you have to of course graduate to that process. But one of the greatest things about it as well is that they don't teach you any ideology. They really just teach. They're like the thing I like about meditation is it's just showing you, instead of explaining what other prophets who have traveled a certain journey have said about the journey and said about the place, the destination. Instead, meditation is just a map. And it says, take your mind and go there yourself, because then you're going to have experience. And that's going to mean a lot more to you than anybody's dogma.
Right. And, even after Krishna says this, that you just have to keep practicing, Arjuna, of course, still has some reservations. And he's like, well, what is the fate of the people who are really sincere on the path, but they're still unsuccessful? And he wants to know if such a person will then lose both materially and spiritually. Are you really gambling everything to go on this path? Because if you're not successful, what do you gain from it? And I think this is really nice, because Krishna then reassures him that the progress that such a person has made will be preserved and carried into their next life. He says first that such a person will reside in the heavenly celestial abode for a number of ages. This is the reward of the people who live virtuously in life. And then they later get another chance at a material embodied existence, where they'll be born into a good family that can support their continued progress and help the person regain the knowledge they acquired in their previous life. And so such a person in their new life will feel unconsciously pulled to pick up their practice where they left off. So he's basically saying, God remembers what you've done. It's not wasted. You do get credit for that in your next go around.
Mm-hmm. And actually, this is kind of similar to the Buddha's own description of the afterlife, where he says that one goes for amongst the gods, where they live for thousands, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, and then eventually just become one with the Paramatman. So eventually you do even dissolve, but you dissolve into God.
Yeah, and I mean, for anybody who's watched episode 9 of the Revolt series, The Two Paths in the Afterlife, basically both paths are going towards this dissolution. One is just that the higher path, the Olympian path, you eventually are going to be dissolved into the Godhead, into that final nirvanic bliss, that union. And then the other is that, you know, if you fail, that you're just kind of dissolved back into the totem, and you just become like a collection of sankharas again. So,
But perhaps actually do experience some sort of a heavenly life, heavenly existence in the celestial realm for a period of time. Could last for 10,000 years before you come back. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, you know, because none of us can ever like fully know what happens after death. I find that I remain very open-minded about it. I don't have like really strict ideas about like this is what happens in the afterlife, and if you do this, you're going there. And um it's in like there's so many possibilities, and I don't necessarily see them all as being like mutually exclusive either. So it's such an interesting topic to ponder about, but it frustrates me that I never get the answer. So I'm just one of these days I'm just going to have to die to find out.
We're seeking the unconditioned, so we should believe in anything that we haven't ourselves experienced. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to what all the great sages have said, and contemplate what they've said. And, you know, because you're not going to figure it all out on your own. It's not that type of individualism. I'm just saying that you have to believe in things that you've seen for yourself, not things that just others have told you have to believe in. I don't think certain types of people just can't be satisfied with that. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Well, are you happy to take some comments and questions from the chat?
Yes. Can you just carry on for 1 minute while I take a quick bathroom break and start with the first question? I'll be right back.
I certainly can. Hurry back,
Okay.
because we may have some for you. So if you guys have got some questions, now's the time to pop them in. I'm just going to scroll back up through the top of the chat to kind of take these in order, see what you guys have been talking about. It's a little bit quieter in the chat tonight, I think, just because we're doing it a little bit late. But I really wanted to make sure that George would be able to make it. I hope you guys have enjoyed having him here rather than just having me monologue. It's something a little different. I've not had a guest on my channel ever before, and it's something I've talked about doing with George, that I'd like to do a live stream with him, because we have a lot of great conversations about this stuff, much of which I still end up sharing with you guys. But you know, like I'd love to do some streams with him about you know, like some of Evola's stuff and everything like that. He's really knowledgeable about this stuff. So all right, let's see what we've got here in the chat. Cat being subversive. That's me. That's what women do. All right. A lot of our regulars here tonight, which is really nice to see. Thunderstorm, breathing meditation techniques literally restart your brain like restarting a computer. I'm glad you've had that experience. Ooh, someone says salads are toxic. Guess they took a disagreement with you there. All right. Jay Lewis, I think Eastern philosophy denies the physical self. It acts like it's an illusion, some dream of higher reality. I intuitively think that the material was made in tandem with the spiritual self. Do you want to take that one, George?
Well, actually, this is a long time discussion that's been had in Eastern philosophical circles. Sri Aurobindo is a teacher who really emphasized the need to not just be escapist out of this world, but instead to really recognize that the physical, material world was important too. That, you know, we couldn't just not worry about the material physical world, thinking that all of our fruits are going to come in the afterlife. That is life negating. Eastern philosophy actually, as is evidenced by the Bhagavad Gita and what Krishna advises Arjuna, is that you know, the Vedantic teaching is very much about the importance also of what happens in the material physical realm. So definitely not something that has to be seen as one or the other. The two are in tandem. Absolutely, I agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Earl Ward asks, have either of you thought about writing books about the subjects you cover? I kind of have possibly one in my mind regarding, you know, the path and fate of women in the Kali Yuga. What about you, George? Have you considered writing a book yourself?
Yeah, I've started many times trying to write like an autobiography of sorts, as I've got kind of a storied life. But you know, I've just always concluded that I needed another decade to fully process everything before I would have a real ability to analyze it all properly. But um, one thing that needs to be mentioned as well, Kat, is that the chapters of the narration for the Revolt series, we are also contemplating that will one day form a book.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you really kind
Yeah,
of
we
are
might.
writing one.
I suppose, yeah, we have talked about compiling what we've written for the Revolt series into a book, but like elaborating on it more, footnoting it properly and everything. But that necessitates us finishing the 40 episode series, and we've got quite a ways to go. But well, there's plenty of life left to live. We'll maybe get there one of
Lord
these
of the
days.
Rings wasn't written in a day.
That's true. Can you address the Nietzsche critique? Chad eats his fill at the feast, but the mob trying to secure their share will say it's a sin to eat too much. It's actually virtuous to fast. Um,
Is
so
it?
I think he's asking, that um the mob will say, because they're not able to secure their share against the person who's more capable, that they're going to try to convince the more capable person not to take as much as he can and tell him that it's virtuous to leave some for them. I mean, he's got a follow-up comment here too, basically saying that the checking natural impulse is the ideology of the worst of us, a denial of the strongest, a denial of nature. So yeah, kind of Nietzschean.
Actually,
Um,
also actually kind of Ragnar Redbeardian. Um,
Might is right.
and even Anton LaVey said that exact last statement. The idea that you don't want to, unless, forgive me if I'm misunderstanding you, Jay, but I think that you're saying here that we shouldn't be checking natural impulse. That if we do so, we're denying nature. That we should be grasping, effectively taking will to power as our objective. And I'll say that none of this is about moralizing on that question. It's about making yourself into a better warrior. Whatever you choose to do with those talents afterwards is your choice to make in life. Um, and it might be for will to power, but for whatever challenge you are setting out on, if you train your mind the same way that you train your physical body, and the union of the two is going to make you the best fighter. And if will to power is your goal, well, you're going to be even better at it. I don't think that there's a law saying that you can't, like, for instance, one could slay their enemies but yet renounce it at the same time. In other words, you're, without hate, you're slaying your enemies, but you're doing so out of duty. You're still slaying your enemies.
Hmm. Well, hopefully Jay finds that a satisfactory answer. The chat had a little bit then a discussion about celibacy. This comment is one I'm not really, as a woman, not really fit to comment on, regarding semen retention being part of Northern European culture. I don't know if you have any experience on that. It's not really a question. I always kind of look for like substantive comments.
Well, it was always said, for boxers not to have sex for many days prior to a fight. Yeah, so it definitely increases testosterone, and yeah, it's something that it's another example of how one should not just be overruled by the senses. One should be in command of themselves.
Yeah. Julius Flavius says, I think mantra is another way to focus the mind.
There's so many
mean,
ways.
there are so many ways. And I actually think mantra can be really good for people who are maybe struggling with the breath meditation, because the speaking of the mantra gives your mind something to focus on, because you're actually having to say the words. So sometimes that can be really helpful.
You can light a candle and stare at it. You can stare into a fire.
Mm.
In your fireplace or a bonfire in your backyard, and just spend time by yourself staring into it. You can do it with sound meditation, like mantra. You can do nada yoga, which is just a form of using musical instruments to connect you to the same place. But the reason that the meditation on the breath and then scanning the body is most effective is that it connects you, instead of through the senses to something external. It's connecting to your own cellular energy and nervous energy, which is all hardwired into your central nervous system. So the experience of scanning the body or focusing on your breath, it just gets you in touch on a deeper level with the place where the mind matter phenomenon meet. It's a place where mind meets matter. That's what you start to experience through it. And you can't really achieve that the same way through mantra. But no, mantra can still be a good, even at Vipassana meditation, they start every meditation session with mantra. Those tones have a very cleansing effect, help the mind get centered. So, these things are all a part of it. Absolutely. The question is just whether they can take you to the ultimate goal.
Adriel Kirby sends a super chat. Thank you very much. He asks, or she, I guess could be either. I'm sorry if I've misgendered you. Is there a risk in meditation of opening oneself up to demonic entities?
Well, actually, this is addressed in Vipassana. They don't go into a lot of detail because they don't want to focus on this, but they do definitely tell people to be wary and not to partake in anything of the nature of trying to connect with any souls on the other side or any intellectual intelligent entities that one might meet. So I mean, it's said in passing, but it is a strong warning, and then they move on from it and don't go back to it. But everything that's considered like part of magic or anything of that sort is all part of the left-hand path. And Theravedic meditation is very much part of the right-hand path, and so it wants to not use any of those left-hand path tools. So one should definitely not, and there is risk of that, yes. And there is also, I believe, in prayer as well, similar. But meditation, because you become more empty, it maybe has more of a chance of that happening. Yeah. But
And
one
I
can
would say
control
even
it.
the same thing with psychedelic use and stuff. I mean, you just hear so many stories of people who will be like, oh, I was in this spiritual headspace and I contacted an angel or a god or a ghost or whatever. And it's like, oh, you should really be careful about that.
Mhm.
I was listening to a recent podcast from Adventures Through the Mind where they were discussing a book called The Dark Side of Dharma, in which they are discussing, some of the very negative experiences that people have coming out of these meditation retreats. And it made me think of, how one of the things we really talked about was that the biggest problem with this isn't necessarily the meditation itself, but that these practices are often divorced from any spiritual context whatsoever, whether it's meditation or psychedelics. It's being used in like a therapeutic context, but nobody's actually putting it into like proper spiritual practice. And it would never have been the case in the past that just anybody could go and do 10 days of 100 hours of meditation in 10 days without any kind of vetting or training or anything like that. That was something that was really the purview of the upper castes, and that you would have you'd have people overseeing your spiritual development, offering guidance. And so I do think some of the ways in which meditation is now done in the West, especially being used in a very secular way, is a lot more likely to open people up to these problems, especially when you consider how many people already have mental disturbances.
Yes, and at a couple of the retreats that I've been to, each time there was one or two persons that just had a problem with it. They were just maybe in the middle of meditation, they would blurt something out. They run out of the room crying. Some people, yeah, it's one of the things they ask you on the application too. They want to know if you're taking any medications, if you have any history of depression or any bipolar or other type of disorders, because it is very difficult. Just like it's difficult on the body as well. You should go into a 10-day fit. You should be flexible. You should be used to sitting down on a cushion on the floor. You should keep your body healthy. You don't want to go in there where, you eat so much cheese and bad food on the outside, junk food, that when you get in there, your body starts to detox and you spend the whole 10 days
Feeling sick.
sick. Yeah. So, you really want to get up early. You want to be sitting every day, like you pointed out, even if it's only 5 minutes of stretching, push-ups, whatever, and 5 minutes of sitting meditating, even if you don't know how. Just focus on your in-breath and your out-breath and try to clear your mind of thought. That's it. Later on, you can start to look into techniques and all that other stuff. But in the beginning, you got to start with the routine. And then at least you go into a 10-day knowing what to expect a little bit more. It's going to be physically demanding. It's going to be tough on you emotionally. And you got to kind of clear your life out and get prepared for it for months before you go in is the most successful type. And you got to apply like 3 months in advance because they're always filling up. An important thing to mention is, long waiting lists. And the important thing to mention as well is that it's free of charge. At the end of that 10-day, you just give a donation as to what you think it was worth to you. They post up on the wall that it cost them about $250 to feed you and house you for the 10 days. So if you wanted to give that as a bare minimum donation, that's what they hope for. But they don't ask you to do it. There's a donation table in the corner, and you just basically go and give a donation of whatever you think it was worth to you. So, if you need to get away, or you're looking to do something like this, but you don't want to, go to some stuffy, westernized, expensive, god awful expensive retreat down in the Caribbean or something, and spend a huge amount of money, you can go to a Vipassana retreat for free of charge, and you can even just send them money later. If you didn't give them anything, nobody would ask you. So I know people that were going through some transition in their lives, and they just continued to live at the center and started building structures for them, chopping down trees and doing all kinds of yard work for them. And they have most of the centers are like 100+ acres. So there's a lot to do there.
They should pay you for your advertising.
Well, it had a big impact on my life. So yeah.
That tends to be the case for people who have gone and had positive experiences. They can't sing the praises of it enough. And I guess if you do have a life-changing experience like that, why wouldn't you want to tell everybody about it?
And it's it's not about that particular method either. Like I'm not it's not a sect for me or a cult. It is just the idea here is that it's the purest version of just Theravedic teaching, where it's
very in line with Doctrine of Awakening.
Yeah, very in line with it. And matter of fact, a lot of the phrases. Yeah, if you could read Doctrine of Awakening before you go into it, would really be amazing. I had the benefit of having done it in that order. And, I could only get about 3/4 of the way, maybe 2/3 of the way through Doctrine of Awakening, because I had read it maybe 10 times up to that page point. But I just couldn't penetrate what he was saying after that. The ideas just became too hard to grasp. But once I went to my first 10-day, I just understood it all perfectly. I went much deeper into the book and reread the parts I'd already read and understood them from a completely different level. So you need to go on the path and have experience. Don't just try to approach this the way we do in the rational Western mind, where you're just going to keep reading about it endlessly. You really got to go.
All right. Next, we have another super chat from Thunderstorm. Thank you very kindly. He says, I started as a kid from training doing 5 in and out count of breathing throughout the day and deep breathing every night. The days I let this slip, I immediately feel it.
That's fantastic. That's exactly the type of thing you need to do. You can set it for yourself, just like no one's telling you what your morality should be. However you choose that you would like to express this self-discipline, it can be just, look, I know a guy that just his goal was to be able to do 500 push-ups in a day. So he just kept a log, and just every day he just did as many push-ups as he could at a time and kept writing down how many he would do. And his hope was to get to 500. By the time he got to 500 in a day, boy, his chest and shoulders were huge, too big even. Who's out of proportion? But you can set it as anything. Just choose something. Maybe you don't have to do yoga. Just do stretching. Doesn't matter what you call it. Doesn't matter what you call any of these things. It's the fruit that's important. It's the goal that's important.
Yes, and indeed. And he also sends another message saying this series is great, especially the explanation of translation. Thanks. You are very welcome, and thank you for being here. Thunderstorm's very active in my Telegram chat as well, so always nice to see him around. see what else have we got here. So he hasn't done the 20 days, but he's done the Satipatthana courses, which is 7 days, but very special. I'm not familiar with that. Do you know which one that is?
Yeah, the Satipatthana course focuses a lot more on the doctrinal teaching. You're still doing a lot of meditation, but you actually are talking. You're not taking a vow of silence. Noble speech only is permitted, and you're speaking about doctrinal teaching. I haven't done a Satipatthana course myself, but that is, I believe this. You have to have done a Sati course even to qualify for a 20-day. So I hope I haven't got that confused with something else, but I'm pretty sure that's the Sati course.
If he's still here and you're wrong, he'll probably correct us in the comments and we'll see it. All right. Don't you think that turn the other cheek leads to a loss of your civilization?
I would say that it definitely can. It's different if you have that mentality towards your neighbor or your good friend. Like if my brother gets angry at me, I do want to practice turn the other cheek, because I think he'll just realize it later on and come back and apologize. No point in me having also joined him and behaving just like he's behaving. So turn the other cheek has its place. But yeah, on a civilizational level between nations, yeah, it absolutely can cause that.
There is a time and a place for it, and on a larger scale, you know, it can result in the just rolling over and losing your civilization. On a interpersonal level, on an individual basis, it's a lot more appropriate.
And also, you know, that's why in the Gita, Krishna is not advising Arjuna to be a pacifist or to turn the other cheek.
Yeah, I mean, he is telling him he has to go fight. It's his duty to fight. So definitely. Got another question from our friend Earl Ward. When is your next album coming out? I don't know, George. When is it coming out?
Well,
why don't you enlighten me at the same time as the rest of our audience?
Yeah, we don't know exactly, but we do know we've got a lot of songs that we've been stockpiling. And
at least half a dozen by now.
Yeah,
I can't even remember the names of them all at this point. We're starting one, and then we get excited about a new one, and then we go work on that instead, and we haven't actually finished any of these.
Yeah, at some point we're going to have to get really disciplined. There's a couple of them that are pretty close, but yeah, we've got.
I liked the way we did it with the Music for Nations album, though. Where like we kind of had all the songs like kind of halfway, 2/3 of the way there, and then we just went through and just finished them all in one go. That was actually, I thought, really fun.
Yeah, eventually you have to just go
you're in the heads, because like you're in the songwriting space, and then you're like in the performance space, and then you're in the polishing space, and it's kind of good to just do all the songs at this. Like, you don't want to be doing songwriting one day and then having to get into the polishing up another song the next day. You want to, to me anyway.
When you're feeling creative, you want to let the creativity flow. And sometimes you're going to go in a phase where you're going to get a bunch of things just partially done, but you're just getting your ideas down. And then, yeah, you have to go back eventually and do that hard work of, you know, getting it all cleaned up and polished and refined. And that's the hard part, of course.
We'll wait until the astrology is conducive to polishing them up.
Well, the other thing too is we should mention that the next album is probably going to be a metal album.
Most likely. So
we will call it folk metal. It will have acoustic elements, but it'll sound kind of a little bit in the lines of Hyperborean Sun from Music for Nations. It'll be that kind of, if you can imagine that, with a little bit more of a metal sound, or even the metal version that Fornell did of one of our songs.
Warrior Poet, he did.
Warrior Poet, that's right, yeah.
All right. Ms. Kat, you're really smart. Where did you go to school, or were you self-taught? Thank you. I don't know how smart I am so much as just I read a lot and I remember a lot. And I don't know if that's really the same thing. There are definitely a lot of people out there who are smarter than I am, probably George included here. If I'm smart or educated, it is in spite of my schooling, not because of it. Most of the stuff that I know and talk about is all kind of self-taught. there's very little that I'm using from my educational career. Basically, in hindsight, it was probably a big waste of time and money to even go to university.
I had a teacher in high school which said to the class on the first day of our grade 12 English course, he said to us, if any of you are really serious about getting an education, you will take this list of 100 books that I've prepared for you. You will go down to the principal's office and resign from school immediately. And you will go to the library or bookstore and you will acquire these books and you will retire from the world until you've read all 100 of them. And if you do this, you'll have a better education than you could ever get at a university. And of course, none of us got up and took the list, but
to your great regret now.
Yeah.
Alan Bloom said something similar when he spoke about like a great books education. So I would imagine a lot of the great books were on your teacher's list.
Yes, and I remember asking him what the most difficult writer on the list was, and he said Nietzsche. So I made Nietzsche where I started. I wanted to read that first. I read all of his works at that time.
Nice. All right, Jay Lewis, back again. How does, I think a word might be missing here, reconcile transhumanism, that we stand on the precipice of technology that will allow consciousness to live indefinitely? Does the soul die with the body, or is consciousness the mediator? What do you think about that?
Well, just wondering what that missing word is about the reconciling. How does one?
I'm
maybe
wondering.
How does one?
I'm wondering if he's referring back to the previous comments of his that we already discussed in regards to like kind of that will to power, or I mean,
so
I'm very anti-transhumanism. I think it's incredibly subversive and evil.
yes, and you shouldn't want to live forever anyway. You should want to know what happens after this life. This life has only got so many experiences and is only going to show so much of it to you. That doesn't mean you should want to hasten the day of your death. You should recognize, though, that there's a beginning and an end, and kind of like a well-eaten meal, there comes a time when you will have experienced what you need to from life. Your body will start aching, and you'll be ready for the next stage of the journey. So the idea of transhumanism, even if I could put my consciousness into some sort of computer, thereby trapping it in this inorganic form that would maybe therefore never be severed, maybe be severed from the soul, or never experience an afterlife as a result. If I had to take that gamble, I would definitely stay away from that by far. I would not want that. I would consider that one of the worst nightmares that I could have foisted upon me, is to made to live forever in a robot. Oh, I'd rather be pushing up daisies.
I have way too much of a morbid curiosity about what happens after death that I'm probably like a little too eagerly looking forward to it.
As to whether the soul dies with the body, if one develops a soul, I think that I consider the soul, from the way I understand it, to be the kind of union between the spirit, which every living thing has a spirit, even like a lizard or a fly has a spirit. That's the difference between a living and a dead one, is whether it has spirit left in it. But not everybody has soul. Soul being the kind of fusion between spirit and mind. So the mind becomes aware of its spiritual self, and the two kind of fuse together and give birth to the soul. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the soul necessarily dies with the body. I don't also think that everybody necessarily has a soul, if understood with that definition, that is, of course.
Yeah, something I probably should have clarified a little bit more the other day when I was on Arvol's channel talking about that. I was just like, not everyone has a soul. I just came across all wrong. This is me with my foot and mouth disease. Scarlett Ann P asks, sometimes I feel like I'm stepping out of place, reaching too high with being so concerned with spiritual matters. Is my interest taking away from my children, husband, mother, my duties? So how does a woman reconcile her duties with a spiritual interest?
I think that it's the key is to make it part of your daily practice. It doesn't have to be take up a tremendous amount of your time and hours. But my question would be, despite maybe not having the time to devote as much to it as you would want to, do you still have a regular practice? If you say, yes, every morning I sit for 5 minutes and I stretch for 5 minutes and I do that every single day, and then I've got a streak of a couple hundred days that I've done this, well, then you're on the right path. And that's, I would answer the question differently. But if you're the type of person that I've met many of them, so, and I've been this person too, so don't take this as anything insulting, but if you're the kind of person that because you don't have the amount of time to dedicate to it, that you just leave it completely unaddressed at all, and you don't do even the basics that you wish you would be doing, then maybe you're just all of your regular earthly duties, your householder duties, your duties to your family, maybe they're just an excuse that you're giving yourself for the not devoting yourself fully to something that you want to do. But I mean, again, it's not a judgment because I don't know anything about your life. I'm just saying that if as long as you're doing some basic regular practice, it will take you longer to get there eventually, but you can still make regular incremental gains, and you'll be surprised after a decade how far you have gone. And I just maybe it's affecting your relationships with the people in your family. Like, I would think that if you're becoming more spiritual, that you would naturally have improved relationships with the people in your life, that you would be more grounded, and that would help you give them good advice and help you have more strength and courage to face all the challenges of your love for them. So, there's different ways of looking at it too, because, I've noticed that on days that I'm meditating more, I sleep less. My brain's getting that deep relaxation without sleep. So it lessens the amount that I need to sleep. So sometimes there's no net loss in time either, even with a regular practice.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like, of course you have duties to your family, but one of those duties is also to keep your family spiritually healthy. And unfortunately, in many modern families, nobody's stepping up into that role. And so if you're the one who's stepping up into that role, I think it's only going to benefit your family. So that's just my kind of take, like, as a woman on that. It's not that part of your duties are spiritual duties. Now, are you neglecting feeding your children because you're busy reading the Bhagavad Gita? Maybe Krishna wouldn't be too impressed with that and would say, please feed your children first and then come back to reading the Gita. But I doubt that that's the case.
Does the stepping out of place maybe come from sometimes maybe you're trying to foist your ideas onto them and they're resisting that? Is that what the
I know Scarlet Ann is she's a regular on this channel, and so I'm going to assume that she's maybe, and she can clarify in the comments if she'd like to, maybe assuming that she is taking on a masculine role by doing this, that it's not exemplary of like the lunar principle so much as like taking over the solar principle. But maybe she can clarify that and we can come back to it. Norbu, our master meditator over here, says meditation is spiritual warfare. It's not for the emotionally injured, not for freshly traumatized people, must be reasonably stable emotionally. I would agree with that. The times in my life where I have been like really not doing well, meditation often like exacerbated mental disturbances or interfered with my sleep and stuff like that. So that's true. Julius Flavius comments on the similar. Some ritual groups in Italy, well, at least one of them had members commit suicide, probably from not being thoroughly trained and having elemental forces further unbalance them. Geez, that's pretty horrible. And we've got, what are your guys' thoughts on the tarot? You're not really into that stuff as much, are you, George?
Well, actually, I never was, but just hearing you having talked to me about it many times, there's some
I've included some tarot symbolism into the Revolt series here and there, but And there is some interesting stuff to it. I've just never personally felt that drawn to it. Like, it's interesting, but I don't practice it. It's not something I spend a lot of time on. There are some really interesting elements of symbolism there. One book that I could recommend to people who are interested is called Meditations on the Tarot, which is like a very Christian interpretation of the symbolism of the Marseille deck. By Valentin Tomberg, I want to say, if I'm remembering that correctly. Norbu says that it's the 7 day Sati course requirement is 3 10-day courses to serve at one course. Sometimes they'll accept if you've done 2 10 days and 1 serve. So there you go.
That sounds right. And it is the doctrinal teachings more than just it's not just another 10-day sitting. It's more to teach you the ideas. But of course, you've already gone a certain distance in to the training before you get to that point. Interestingly, the term Upanishad means at the foot of your teacher. And really, you're not supposed to be taught things until you've already had some experiences and you ask your teacher about them, and that's when they teach them to you. So that's the idea of the Sati course. You have to have already graduated through these other courses, because in the beginning, they're not teaching you anything. You're unfolding it by asking questions, and then just in piece by piece, you reveal more to yourself. And as you go along that journey, they start to teach you more.
Yes. All right. And we've got a comment here from Synthwaves Matter. Inspiration, motivation, intelligence are all useless without discipline.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Discipline is, people who are maybe not as talented in some ways, but just have a lot of discipline often achieve much more than people who have a lot of talent and no discipline. Indeed. I think. Let's see what else there's like a big discussion going on here as to whether or not I should be wearing makeup again. I don't know what is up with you guys tonight and last night. You know what? It is what it is.
Kat almost never wears makeup, like barely ever.
Yeah, just a few comments regarding last night's stream. But it's not that I think I need makeup, but when you're sitting under a ring light, it's helpful. I have actually, I've never been one of those women to feel like I had to wear makeup going out necessarily. And I often always used to kind of feel bad for women who couldn't even go to the grocery store without putting on a full face of makeup. And I was just kind of like, well, I don't really feel like I need it, but sometimes it's nice to wear it, and this is kind of the only occasion I really get to. So there's some fun in it. It only takes 10 minutes. So, and of course, Earl loves my cat, who made a very nice appearance, hitting me in the face with his tail while you were talking. He's actually been pretty good tonight. He's a funny boy. He's the more time I kind of spend doing these streams, the more he's getting used to it. So, and Scarlett says, thank you for that thoughtful answer. Yes, my spiritual progress has helped my familial relationships. I'm really glad to hear that, Scarlett. I know you're very sincere spiritual speaker, just from the few occasions we've had to chat. Your family's probably very lucky to have you. Edward here, a friend of mine, caring for one's family can be an act of karma yoga. Absolutely correct. I would definitely agree with that. And because when you consider the fact that you have to do your duty to your family, and Krishna is saying, do your duty, just do it with attachment, without attachment. Sorry, got that completely wrong. But whatever your duties are in life, whatever the tasks are that God has put before you, yes, do those duties, act in the way that you are supposed to, but without the attachment to the outcome, which, if you've got kids to feed, you're probably a little bit attached to them, not starving. But it's more the case that go to work, earn the money, bring home the bacon, and leave the rest in God's hands. Do what you are able to do, what's in your sphere of influence, and just be unattached to the rest. Would you agree?
Yes, and stay sober and grow and read.
Yeah.
Become an asset to the family, yeah.
Would you feel weird streaming without makeup on? I'm just so baffled by the fascination with this. I don't understand. Help me understand.
Well,
I
why
don't know if
don't
I
you wear
feel
a
weird
dirndl?
about it.
Why don't you wear a dirndl and no makeup?
Some Heidi braids, and I could do
Yeah.
that, go for the
Yeah.
milkmaid
I
look.
mean, why? Yeah, I guess
You
you
know,
would you
when
feel
I
weird?
see clients over Zoom on a video call, I'm not wearing makeup. When I'm running my astrology study groups for a whole group of people, I'm not wearing makeup. A lot of times it's just more like I don't have the time or the patience for it. But if I'm setting up to do a live stream, I know in advance, I'm setting up the lighting, I'm setting up the recording equipment. I got to do something with my hair, so I may as well do something with my face. And, I probably should also like put pants on, even though you guys can't see that. So it's just, I don't know, it's just part of the process. It's just, I don't
Right.
know. It's not such a big deal to me as people seem to be making it out to me.
Just, I guess it's fun to talk about.
It's so strange.
It's like it reminds me of that Monty Python scene where the guy says people aren't wearing anywhere near enough hats. It's kind of like after considering what we've been talking about in this in the last hour and a half.
Yeah, I know. It's like, let's just focus on the high vibrational conversation. And then it's like, let's talk about makeup. And I'm like, really? Well, and Edward suggests a nice wheat field with the background, if I go the milkmaid route.
You
So,
kind of got the little bit of the golden wheat field look right now,
little
kind of going
bit,
on.
little bit, but
Yeah.
as I unpack my boxes, I'm gonna see if I can find my mandala background again and put that up
Oh.
instead, because I've always preferred that. I'm not a big fan of I've scavenged this gold background from curtains in another part of the house because the ones in
Uh-huh.
this room are absolutely hideous. Um, So I'm kind of just like replacing them. But I prefer my mandala. It's like it's the same color as my hair, so I feel like my head blends into the background. But
So you
here
have
we are
really big
again
hair.
thinking about like, look, I guess it's all about optics, right? Optics, aesthetics, that's all very spiritual, right? Braids and sundresses only. I have to say that's probably my typical look these days. It's not much else I can do in the humidity other than kind of put my hair in a braid. But I think unless anyone else has any further questions or comments that you'd like us to address, we'll probably wrap it up here. George, do you have any kind of final thoughts for people or any advice that you'd like to leave people with? I don't know if you'll ever be able to join us for a stream again. Maybe people in the comments would let me know how what you thought of having a guest on for this stream. If you enjoyed having George here, if you'd like him back. I'll probably bring him back anyway, whether you guys like it or not, because I like to talk to him. I don't care what you guys think. But, uh, yeah, we'd love the feedback. And I know I've certainly appreciated having you here, George. It's nice to kind of just get another perspective to kind of be able to bounce back and forth. Um, for as long as we've been friends, one of the things I've always appreciated the most about you was your spiritual insights. And I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, George has been a big influence on me spiritually, was a big factor in me being able to kind of come back to spirituality from my atheist phase. It was him that kind of put the doctrine of awakening in my hands and kind of sparked my interest in Evola. So this channel and the Revolt series and everything owes a very big debt to him, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to invite him on, because I know that he has really good insights and often gives really good spiritual advice. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed that, and bring you back for a great discussion. So you'll have to make time in your busy schedule to do it again one of these days. And any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
I would say that I would just reiterate what I said earlier, that life is a process, that struggle is never ending, and that you have to just take a mentality that allows you to stay in it for the long haul. I turned 52 this summer. So, I've been interested in dissident right politics since I was 16 years old, reading John Birch Society stuff back then. And, I can just say that if you find a spiritual center and you make that the basis around which you internally support yourself, whatever that is for you. It can be Catholicism, it can be any type of religion. When you do that, when you make that your foundation, then you will have the strength that you need to face the world. And there are hard times coming, so steel your mind and get ready for that, and do the work you need to do in preparation for it. And then maybe one day we'll get to build a better world.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, George. And yeah, your journey from kind of the dissident right politics to being a spiritual seeker, and that's I think a really amazing and inspiring story that I wish more people knew about, especially because there are so many young men today who are you know, doing some of the same things you did in your youth. And I know you kind of cringe looking at it, and wishing that, you know, maybe they had a little bit more of a spiritual orientation that might save them from making some of the same mistakes. So I really hope that people will kind of take on board what you're saying here, and maybe people will even consider doing a Vipassana course if they're interested. We've got one last super chat that's popped in. Thank you, Josh Randall. Would you share your skin routine secrets? Kidding. Thank you for streaming. Thank you so much, Josh. That's really nice of you, and appreciate the chuckle. So, all right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there because we've gone a bit longer than my normal Bhagavad Gita streams go, but I think it was a really fruitful discussion. And yeah, I always get a lot out of listening to, and I'm sure others have as well. So thank you very much for making the time tonight, George.
Kat, it was great to do this with you, and this is just really take any one of our 2-hour conversations that we have on this kind of stuff, and we just basically did it on YouTube this time. But it was enjoyable as always to dissect such a great chapter from such an important book. So looking forward to hearing the rest of the episodes as they as each week unfolds.
Indeed. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back. So thanks again. And I'm going to kick you out now so that you can get back to doing some editing on the next Revolt episode.
Oh, you worked me so hard.
The public is waiting.
All right. Take care.
All right. Good night, everyone.